In order to find the hotbed of culpability, we need to calibrate the lenses to target where exactly we failed as a university to help the country come up with a national industrial policy. And for this, I found the missing link in the policies propagated by the School of Economics. For one, by this time, it had become evident that industrial policy could lead to impressive industry growth and overall economic development. Nonetheless, our economists and planners persisted in the neoliberal approach. Malaysia looked east to South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan starting 1985, while we remained fixated on Washington. Malaysia made mistakes, such as the Perwaja Steel Project, as we did, but learned from them while we cast industrial policy away completely. The Heavy Industries Corporation of Malaysia, for example, has attained moderate success, definitely much more than we were able to achieve. Malaysia's Proton car, which was based on Mitsubishi technology, is now exported to other countries, including the Philippines. Its steel industry now has a number of firms with integrated steel production capacity. Its electronics, semiconductor ventures were able to move up the higher value chain to design and testing. By following industrial policy rather than the World Bank's structural adjustment program, Malaysia was able to achieve much more than the Philippines. In foreign direct investments alone, from 1996 to 2005, Malaysia attracted nearly 3 times that of the Philippines, $39 billion compared to our $14 billion. Despite Mahathir's vigorous criticism of American policy prescriptions for Asia, the U.S. remained one of the largest investors in Malaysia. Industrial policy worked in Malaysia, and it can work in our country. Unfortunately, our economists in NEDA, who were mostly from the UP School of Economics, became averse to state intervention, citing the negative experience during Marcos's time. Also, the period from the mid-1980s up to about the end of last year was the heyday of neoliberal dogma. The collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 90s prompted Francis Fukuyama to hail the end of history and confirm the superiority of the unfettered market over a state interventionist command economic system. Some neoliberals even went as far as claiming that this signaled the demise of the nation state, since corporations know better than government what is good for society. The overall atmosphere then shunned industrial policy. In this sense, the position taken by the School of Economics appears understandable, but it is not correct. The mega free market, the United States, practices industrial policy, except that the U.S. does not call it as such. Lester Thurow called it backdoor industrial policy, while Peter Eisinger called it strategic economic planning. No matter its name, U.S. government intervention in industry leans closer to industrial than to free market policies. For instance, the bailout of Chrysler in the late 1970s, the recent cancellation of the contract won by Airbus to supply refueling jets to the U.S. Air Force, the more recent bailout of banks, investment houses, and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and the soon-to-be implemented bailout of GM, Ford, and Chrysler Motors. So if even the holy grail of free market practices industrial policy, why did we so religiously adhere to structural adjustment programs and ignore industrial policy as a plausible growth strategy? One answer lies in the mindset of our nation's economic planners, who tend to outdo the ministers who preach the mantra of neoliberalism. The almost ideological position taken by the School of Economics on the free market is matched, on the other hand, by the failure of those who believe in industrial policy, in this case, the Technology Management Center, to articulate their position. Proponents of industrial policy need to argue more aggressively for an industrial policy agenda and question the country's development strategy instead of allowing economic planners to dominate the discussion. I realize this voice could sound like one in the wilderness, given the predilection of Philippine presidents for the free market and their subservience to World Bank prescriptions. But silence with regard to the development of our industry, founded on solid science and engineering, is simply not an option for the country, lest we sink deeper into poverty. On the part of UP, in the next 10 years, we must work doubly hard to become a strong research university so that we can contribute more visibly and significantly to the development of our industry. We must also convince the country's leadership to adopt industrial policy. Well, let me discuss now what industrial policy should look like in the next 25 years. I believe that the obvious, necessary, and urgent take-off point for industrial policy lies in energy. The world cannot continue depending on fossil fuels for energy. Oil will run out in fewer than 100 years, the same with natural gas, and coal in maybe 400 years. Burning these fuels to produce electricity or power vehicles does not make sense because of the global warming problem. These fuels are also the input materials for the petrochemical industry, and biotechnology has not found a substitute for them yet. At the same time, we're up against a giant industry. Fossil fuels account for about 80% of the total primary energy supply, and the industry employs millions of employees, millions of people worldwide, and tens of millions more in related downstream industries. We are thus in a bind. The fossil fuel industry cannot be shut down without causing major economic dislocations. But if we continue using fossil fuels, they could run out and in the process dump too much carbon dioxide to make global warming truly irreversible. The solution then is to systematically phase down fossil fuel use in power generation and transportation, and to do this, we require industrial policy. Renewable energy systems and nuclear fission will need to have a larger share of the energy industry, and this is where the market mechanism comes in. Eventually, it should compete with fossil fuels through market mechanisms after a given period of industrial policy support. I also believe, and this should assuage our free market ideologues in the School of Economics, that industrial policy should not be used continuously and indefinitely. Countries that successfully adopted industrial policy point to a 25-year time frame. Those that maintain central planning too long, like the former Soviet Union and China, did not take off economically until they mixed in free market policies. Have no fear of industrial policy. Even advanced countries, including the country I now call the USSA, the United States of Socialist America, will apply industrial policy to address the energy problem. What should energy industrial policy look like? First, it must be grounded in science. 20% of energy from the sun is captured in the hydrologic cycle, that is wind, ocean, currents, and waves, while only 1% is used for photosynthesis to produce agricultural products, algae, and maintain forest cover. Thus, wind, current, and waves possess 20 times more energy than biofuels. If not handled properly, biofuels may also have adverse effect on food production. Science further tells us that the most concentrated energy source is found in the nucleus, with fission producing 1 million electron volts of energy per nucleon and fusion 3.5 million electron volts of energy per nucleon. Nuclear processes produce 100 million times more energy than the atomic processes, which bind hydrocarbons. Fission power generation technology has been around for the past 50 years, while fusion power plants may only be realized if the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor, or ITER project, works by 2030. Since we have not made any investment in fusion energy, The time horizon for us to benefit from fusion would be 50 years at the minimum. In sum, sound science tells us that we must go into wind, solar photovoltaics, and nuclear fission in the next 25 years to augment our geothermal and hydroelectric energy. Clean coal technology also looks like an option because there's 400 years of supply and it's now available. The power generation technologies of the future will be a mixture of one, centralized second-wave power plants such as nuclear fission, clean coal, geothermal, and hydroelectric, which are made more efficient by third-wave control systems. Two, centralized third-wave power plants like huge wind farms, tidal currents, and fusion plants. Three, the centralized second-wave systems for houses and communities such as mini and micro hydro and bio-wastes. And four, third-wave decentralized systems for houses and communities including wind and solar PV. The crucial operational component of all these is the grid, which will enable everyone connected to it to be both a buyer and seller of electricity. A great deal of research will need to be done in power distribution because no one, not even the USSA, knows how to do this efficiently. There is one more reason why I prefer to focus on electricity rather than biofuel production. Biofuels require processing corn, sugarcane, jatropha curca, etc., which entails energy consumption before it can be used to power vehicles. Wind energy, on the other hand, will produce electricity directly, which can be used to run electric vehicles. Developing the electric car industry, no doubt, poses a massive challenge, but also offers abundantly rewarding opportunities. Electric vehicle technology exists, though at an infant stage. In the USSA, hobbyists even convert old internal combustion vehicles to run on batteries. It is true that the current technology has only 1/4 the range of an internal combustion engine vehicle owing to the limitation of present batteries. But research on energy storage systems, new engines, and fuel cells is a wide open field that we can get into. The business potential is also great. In the USSA, startup companies are giving Detroit stiff competition. Mitsubishi, I think, is ready to sell electric vehicles, while Toyota and Honda are beta testing hydrogen-fueled electric cars.